Hi, I'm Elizabeth Macneal and I'm the author of The Doll Factory, which is here, the beautiful Waterstones exclusive edition. The Doll Factory is set in 1850s London and it's about art and obsession and possession and curiosity and love. It's about Iris, and she's a doll-making apprentice who dreams of becoming an artist, and Silas, a collector of curiosities who becomes obsessed with her and whose obsession might destroy her world forever. So I'm at my local Waterstones in Canary Wharf, and I'm here to share 3 books which have inspired me and which I absolutely love. So the first one is Perfume by Patrick Suskind. I actually read this just before I started writing The Doll Factory, and I was particularly gripped by the unredeemed psychopath at its core, where Suskind just completely embraces portraying him as an utterly evil, reprehensible character. So it's set in 18th century France, in Paris at the beginning, and it's about scent and smell. So you've got Jean-Baptiste, and he's born with this incredibly strong sense of smell, which leads him first of all to be a perfumer, and then he catches the wondrous scent of a young woman and he murders her. The way that he builds Paris was particularly inspiring for me as a writer, particularly through scent. So in the very first chapter you've got the smells of the tanneries and catguts and sewage, and I just thought that this was just this incredibly evocative and immersive, visceral sort of sense of historical Paris. I also love it because he plays so much with genre. So at the beginning it kind of opens with a sort of historical folklore element, but it's also a thriller, and there's he touches on the sublime and romanticism and horror, and I was really inspired by the way that he draws all of these things together, and that he doesn't feel confined by a particular genre, but he just kind of embraces so many different elements. So yeah, this is a cracking book. So the second book which inspired me is The Hand That First Held Mine by Maggie O'Farrell. I'm a massive Maggie O'Farrell fan, and I think I've read everything that she's ever published, and this one is my favourite of her books. I always find it quite strange with historical fiction, how historical fiction is sort of usually compared with other historical titles, and also you're sort of seen as an author to only be inspired by other historicals, but for me so much of my inspiration was contemporary, and this is one of the perfect examples, because Maggie, she builds such a tremendous sense of pace, and she interweaves threads so evocatively, and I'm also fascinated by her characters. So she often has a very powerful and quite unique female character at the core, and I thought a lot about that when I was writing The Doll Factory, particularly at the beginning, where The Hand That First Held Mine is about Lexi Sinclair, and she is in quite a stifling situation which was conventionally acceptable at home, but she dreams of different things and she kicks against that. And then when she meets Innes Kent, that's his name, she finds herself, she moves to London and she falls in love with him, and she works on his magazine and works to become a journalist. And I found this really helpful when I was looking at Iris, and she begins working in this doll making shop, and she longs for better things, and she's willing to defy those around her to achieve her own dreams. And I just thought a lot about how that would feel, even though this is set in 1960s Soho and The Doll Factory is set in 1850s, well, also Soho, I suppose, but still that kind of how eternal the human spirit is, and that desire to do something better, and also how that freedom can be liberating and fulfilling, but it can also feel quite terrifying and fragile at the same time. And Maggie O'Farrell just does that so convincingly and brilliantly, and with so many twists as well, so it's a fabulous book. So the final book which inspired me is Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray, and this is quite a beast, but it is my favourite historical novel. Historical in that it was written in 1848, but also because it is a historical novel in that it was set in 1814 during the Napoleonic Wars. It's a brilliant book. When I was writing The Doll Factory, I actually I'm a potter as well, and I had this on repeat on audiobook, just because I thought that his creation of that society and the naked ambition of Becky Sharp was just so inspiring. And also I learnt a lot about 1848 in that lots of historical novels are more about the time in which they're written than the time in which they're set. So if Thackeray sort of said, well, they didn't wear varnished boots back then I'd sort of think, oh, well, 2 years later in 1850 when my novel was set, I would put in a reference to varnished boots. So yeah, I find it immensely helpful and immensely interesting as well in how the Victorians viewed that kind of ambition of Becky Sharp, and that she's never quite able to exercise it without conceit and selfishness and spite, and she has to be punished for it. So that was incredibly helpful when I was writing my character Iris and her ambition, but she's also a very generous character where she doesn't have that kind of edge that Becky Sharp had in her own kind of pulling herself up in that society. So yeah, it's a wonderful book, and I come back to it all the time.